I am really I'm blessed to have an opportunity to talk to this next person. Just a monumental person when it comes to mathematics education and technology. The creator of WooTube. I'm going to talk to Eddie Woo. This is going to be so exciting. We're getting there. We're on our way. There you are. Can you hear me?
Hey, Dave. There you are.
Yes.
How you going?
Oh man, I am just tickled to death to get an opportunity to talk to you.
No, look, my pleasure. Look, and I'm sorry as well about times and links and all that kind of thing. I hope you haven't been put out or anything like that.
Absolutely not. No, I actually was just on my phone reading an article about hammerhead worms. Apparently, they're native to Australia. Uh,
Yeah, we got a lot of weird, bizarre species around here, man. Seriously.
yeah, exactly. And like, recent. I've never actually had an opportunity to talk to somebody from Australia. So, thank
Hey,
you.
I feel very honored to be the
Yes,
first.
I appreciate it. And I think that whatever I've seen on, cultural TV or whatever, everybody says everything in Australia is trying to kill you. So I just
It's
don't know
it,
how
it's
I could sleep.
Look, it's pretty funny, right? And in fact, so much so that we even when there are lots of species that have nothing to do with any lethality or venom or things like that, we even make up species that all like there's little like stories that we tell kids. I don't know if you've heard of drop bears. Like it's a story that gets told. It's they're completely fictitious
Yeah.
characters, but if you can convince a young child that these things are gonna come out of a tree and get you. So I don't know, it's something to do with Australian culture and our obsession with danger. No idea.
I think it's amazing. My children are 7 and 3 years old, and my 3 year old's about to turn 4, and she is obsessed with Bluey. Is it a cultural
Ah,
phenomenon there too, or is it just
Oh
here?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting because, here in just like in most countries, I suppose our children's TV, it comes from a variety of different places. We've got a lot of UK stuff as well.
Sure.
But we're like, okay, this is Australian, and it was really amusing to all of us when we were like, oh, there are other people around the world who find this as hilarious as we do. So
Yeah.
I'm glad she's enjoying it. That's a beautiful
Yeah, no,
age.
I want to be just like Gunner. Every time my daughter says to do something, I'm like, I have to be this creative Gunner style dad now, you know?
It's like, you know what? That's like, I feel a slight sort of peer cultural pressure, but in a good direction. Like, he's a great
Right.
dad. So,
Right.
thumbs up, right?
Exactly. He's such a good dad. Well, you just I know you know your statistics, right? You have over 1 million people who subscribe to your channel on YouTube. You've been viewed over 140 million times. I know your background. I know my students are going to know your background, so I'm not going to dive too much into that. What I do want to do is be able to talk to a fellow math teacher about stuff that we have to deal with, right?
For
And
sure.
as a first year teacher, um, what advice did you get that really helped you settle in and become more comfortable as an educator?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And in
Thank you.
fact, I think one of the problems that I have with this is that I got so much great advice, Dave. I don't know where to begin. So I will try to be like, so that we're not here for the next 3 hours. I'll try to be, disciplined with myself. I can think of two things. One of which was immediately practically helpful and still is, and the other thing which at the time was not helpful, but now I see the value of it and I try and pass on the same advice, which is what I'm going to do now. So the
Yeah.
first practical thing was to get into lots of other classrooms and to spend time observing my colleagues in practice. And particularly, I remember being told, you're going to teach mathematics, but don't just go to mathematics classrooms. You've got so much to learn from the physical education teachers and how they, wrangle a large group of people to do all different things all at the same time in an outdoor space. How do music teachers who are also trying to develop this very practical skill, English teachers and their power with storytelling. That advice has been something which I've held on to, and now I've been teaching for more than 15 years now. I still do that, and I still learn new things. So
Right.
there's piece of advice number one.
Yes.
Piece of advice number two was I was told that you need to kind of work out how to have a version of yourself to these students that's you. It's authentically you. Like you can't fake being. I can't be you, and you can't be me. So you can't pretend to be someone else. But at the same time, you've got to sort of embrace that part of you that will engage and interest students. And I was kind of like, as a first year teacher, I thought, how do you do that? It felt a little bit like the advice I got when I was 15, 16 years old, and I was like having girl troubles, and my popular friends would say, you just got to be yourself, man. And I'm like, that's probably true, but completely unhelpful. So I remember hearing that and thinking, I don't really know how to do that as a first year teacher. But now I think what those teachers meant to say to me was like, there's a persona, there's like a version of Eddie that is useful to all the wide variety, like in high school in Australia, average maths teacher, sorry, average teacher actually for any subject in high school takes about 150 students. What's it like in the US? Is it similar, different?
Well, it really depends on where we're at. So I started in or in urban Kansas City. So I had right around 120 students
Mm,
per year,
mm,
school year.
yep.
And the school had 1,300 students total.
Mm,
And now I'm in rural Kansas. So where's there only 4,300 people in this town? And
mm,
I see about 70-ish. I get 70 new
yeah,
students
yeah,
a year.
yeah.
Um, and and like I think uh you're not saying this, but trying to develop a relationship with those kids with each
Mm,
one is tough, right? Like how do
absolutely.
I engage the interest of 70 people and keep it all
Yeah.
sorted out? And I
And
am
with that broad diversity as well, that's the challenge,
right,
right?
right,
Yes.
absolutely, exactly. So and I appreciate what you're saying is being your authentic self so that those students can see you and then they can approach you and
Mm,
making yourself approachable as your authentic self. I think I think that's really valuable advice because then
yeah.
anybody can. You're not
Yeah.
you're not
100%.
teaching to a niche. You're not teaching to like the three girls who sat up front who absolutely love math, or like my sister had Mr. Wu. He's going to be awesome. I'm going to sit up front and take every note. Like, got that one kid, right? You're going to teach to
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. I
So
have a responsibility for the whole
right,
class. Exactly.
right. And that's I'm in year 6, 7, 8-ish. And it's that part is just now starting to become more prevalent, right?
Mm,
Where
mm,
I'm I'm being more conscientious of the daily day in day out interactions that I'm having with those kids. So I
mm,
really
mm.
appreciate that. When I was first starting, I watched a MIT lecture from a professor at MIT who is the director of physical chemistry, and he did a lecture about lectures, right? So he was giving a
Got
lecture
it. Very
about,
meta.
yeah,
Okay.
very
Yes.
yes, it is very meta. And so he was talking about, he told this really short story about how it was the first day of his entry level PChem class at MIT, his first year as a freshman. He walked in and the lecture was way over his head. Like he had no
Mm.
clue. And he turned to his buddy and he goes, well, I'm dropping this class. And his buddy looked back at him and said, well, I'm going to come back next time because I want to see what color bow tie he wears. And so he goes, all right, okay. And so he decided to come back because his buddy wanted to see what color bow tie he was going to wear next class, right? And so he was going to drop the class, but it was because of this bow tie. And so he talked about owning eccentricities as a
Mm.
professor or as a teacher. And I love that you're hinting at that of being your authentic self. That's awesome that there are those parallels.
100%. And I think just to sort of close off that idea, there's no point trying to be someone else. Like you have to be you, but also to not shy away from that. Like every teacher has their idiosyncrasies that make connection with the teacher for the student easier to do. Because I think there is, I have definitely worked with teachers before, and this is a phrase which I didn't coin. I'm not young and cool enough to say this kind of thing. But I'm like, I think I know what you mean. This pre-service teacher actually, she said to me, sometimes I work with teachers and they're really bland. And I said, what do you mean by that? And it's like, look, they teach their curriculum, they might do it well, but I don't have any sense of who they are as a person. And so it's very hard to connect with them. And so much of teaching is not just delivering curriculum, it is student connection and relationship, like you've been saying. So that's why I think that's critical.
Well, I think what made you explode, and I know you've heard this from tons of people, but now that I have your attention, I get to tell you to your face via Zoom. Your excitement and enthusiasm is palpable. There is it's just so close to being tangible, and it's
Mm.
just it's wonderful. I've shown like a handful of your videos to my students, when I'm like, I could tell you with this, but he's got a really good explanation, right? So I spend my lunch breaks watching like number file, Veritasium, and you and other things just to get an idea of like maybe I want to teach it different next year, maybe
Mm.
whatever it might be. And so when I hear you, like sometimes the way you say something or your explanation of a certain topic is just so good. I'm not going to try and imitate this, guys. I got something out of this, and let's just watch it, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Sometimes
Mm.
that's an okay thing to do, and I appreciate you being a resource as far as that goes. And I just wanted to just say thank you for having the enthusiasm for mathematics and allowing the world, right, having the globe just be okay. I'm not just enthused with mathematics because
Mm.
of you, and I appreciate that.
No, that's I mean, I would say that that's excessively kind of you, Dave, because in some ways I don't know how else to be. But actually
Right.
your words remind me a lot of, I don't know if you have ever heard of, there's this pair of magicians in the US actually called Penn and Teller. I mean, they're pretty famous. They
Yes.
got this show in Las Vegas,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And Teller very famously does not speak
Correct.
during his magical acts, right? For any of the students out there who are like, who are these people, right?
Yeah.
And he's a just go watch him, find a clip of him. There's many on YouTube. But
Yeah.
one of the
Please.
things he said, because he does actually he does actually talk. He's not mute. It's just during his acts, right? And one of the things he has said in an interview which I read, which is amazing, was talking about exactly the point you're mentioning. He says, if what I'm trying to do is communicate to an audience. I want to bring joy and delight to them, my own joy and delight in whatever it is that I'm doing, and for him, it's obviously the performance of sleight of hand or an illusion or something like that. But for us, it's about ideas, concepts, skills, these patterns and realities that are sort of swimming around us in the world. And if we can capture and sort of bottle, I guess, that sort of excitement of discovery and like I can't believe, like this is mind blowing that this is an idea which I can explain to you through mathematics. I think that's the first step to helping our students engage with it, right? Someone said to me once, if you want to be interesting to your students, then be interested,
Oh
yourself,
wow.
be interested.
Yeah.
So I found that really powerful advice.
Yeah, that's really good. So when your videos went absolutely crazy and you're sitting there going, "Oh my goodness." I was trying to help one kid. Like I just wanted to keep one kid in the loop, right? You've had that
Mm-hmm.
when you were a student and you missed one day of school and you came back the next day, like the bus ride to school or the car ride to school. I always was like, man, they all have a secret that I don't have. Like I missed out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I absolutely missed out, and I hated that. What's really cool is that the way you started is by trying to keep a kid in the loop, right? And that was awesome. I appreciate that. Whenever it
Mm-hmm.
started to go crazy, did you have a what was your principal thinking? Did your principal come to you and say, "Hey, now,
Yeah.
Mr. Wu, we need to talk about this," or like,
It's a great question.
you're
So,
doing this on company time, it's going to be a
yeah,
company
yeah,
dime,
no,
you
no,
know?
yeah, fair point. It's a really interesting kind of like this is a great question. Like I've had the great joy and privilege of being interviewed a bunch of different times, but this is actually a question that's never been posed to me in this exact way. So let me take you back and tell you a bit of the story, right?
Please.
The first principal I had, who when I had started the channel, so this is back in 2012, like a million years ago, right? But when I first floated this idea with her, she was like, "Oh, okay." Like I think when I said YouTube, she was like, that's the thing with cat videos, right? Like what is this, right? What's the point of, do you really belong with that? And this is also back in the days when you had to have only certain accounts could upload content any longer than 10 minutes.
Oh,
Like
that's
it was
right.
back in, this is a long time ago, right? Anyway,
Right.
I think she just found it a curiosity. Thought maybe, these young people and their fads. Like I was a lot younger than I am now, right? Still in my
Right.
20s. And I think she just thought, whatever. And as you point out, it started to grow. And I think she just kind of looked at it with bemusement. And actually, again, sort of by coincidence, very soon after it started to grow, I actually got I got a new job at a new school, and I said to that principal, "Hey, are you okay if this is something I started doing in my previous school? Would you be all right if I continued doing it?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, your videos are the part of the reason why one of the staff members at our school saw them, and she was the one who reached out to you and said, 'Hey, do you want to apply for this position?'" Like that
Oh,
was the
that's
invitation, and I
cool.
didn't really understand that. So I was like, "Oh, okay." They had this recognition that this was out there and that they were okay with it. I still don't quite think that anyone fully comprehends. Like it's lovely, but very strange. I'll be doing the grocery shopping with my kids, or I'll be sitting in the airport at the gate, ready to catch a plane to go speak at a conference or something, and people will come and say hello. They'll be like, "Are you that maths guy?" Which is
Yeah.
just it's never not strange, but it's a real delight that it means it tells me, just like you've said to me today, I get to have this outsized impact, which I do not deserve, but I'm grateful to have the opportunity. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so the reason for all of this is that I do a bracket. So one way that I try to inspire my students is I spend, oh, maybe 10, 15 minutes at the end of the week introducing people of a historical importance in mathematics. And I've done this in a bracket where they vote on who they like, and we do a tournament, right? And it's been dead people for years. And so finally, I said, "Oh, we're going to introduce living mathematicians." And I started to think about the criteria for great living mathematicians. And of course, you search YouTube, you go, who are the 10 best living mathematicians? And, Terence Tao, Australian. And and you get like Ian Stewart and Bruce Burnt and Pat Devlin. You get these interesting names that pop up, and I started thinking, like, why don't I just email these people and see if they'll talk to me? Which has been a crazy adventure. I've talked to some of the greatest mathematicians of our time. And then I started thinking, what's my criteria for a great mathematician? Is it somebody that does the work, or is it somebody that can communicate the work? And so
Mm,
I started looking at, like, Brady Heron is a journalist, also
mm.
Australian. Matt Parker is a comedian, also
Yeah.
Australian. And I start thinking, like, they matter. Like, this
Mm,
group of people really matter in mathematics. What you are doing is you're being a help to a global cause, right? There's a global audience that you are reaching, and so I feel like that absolutely matters. So I
mm.
put you in my list of 16 living mathematicians, right? And I'm gonna let my students vote and see how it goes. And I wish you the best of luck this year. And I will keep you informed on how you do.
Yeah, I
But that,
appreciate that, Dave. I've got to
yeah,
say, I will be very open and transparent and say
I don't mind.
every year when I'm watching like the US Open or something like that, and I'm keeping tabs on something where there's a tournament, people get knocked out and so on. I'm like, yeah, you know what? When I had a look at some of the names you mentioned, I'm like, don't think I'm going to get very far into these brackets, but that's okay. It is its own honor. It truly is,
Right.
especially hearing you just talk just now. It is its own honor to even be part of all of this and to have the opportunity to help your students, I think, see just the I know we said this word before, but the diversity of who engages with mathematics, I think that's critical. It's interesting you talked about highlighting these people and personalities and their contributions, I guess, to the field of mathematics. The school that I went to when I was a kid, they actually had a long corridor, and in that corridor they had images of mathematicians throughout history, and they were great people. You had Pythagoras, and you had Euclid, and you had Ramanujan, and all these incredible people, right? But it was definitely a moment where, say for example, in this list, there was only a single woman, and that was Ada Lovelace, and I
Sure.
thought to myself, Yeah, okay, look, I mean, interesting bunch of names, but I didn't really, think that hard about the fact that, okay, it's really hard to be something if you can't see it. And, I hope for your students that as a person who, by my own admission, mathematics was something which took a long time for me to warm to, certainly all the way through school. And even part way through university, that's probably when there was a bit of a tipping point. I wouldn't have called myself like even you saying now to me like, I'm thinking about mathematicians and you're in this, big group. I'm like, really me? But hopefully what I can do is broaden your students' sense of who a mathematician can be, because I think we all have our place in that arena.
You're absolutely right. And I think that just being able to communicate mathematics is a skill within mathematics.
Mm.
It is. I think it is a branch of mathematics. And I think Brady Heron. Have you had a chance to meet Brady yet?
We haven't. We've traded communication back and forth, but despite the fact that we are both from the same country, I mean, he's based in the UK at the
Right.
moment, and
Sure.
we've long. I actually. It's really interesting, right? Obviously, I make my own videos online, and when I've got a thing I want to talk about, I will just make a video. But I have, Dave, an idea in my back pocket that I've been storing for if I ever get the opportunity to sit in front of that legendary brown
Oh,
paper. And
yeah.
I've been like, no, no, I've steadfast, like I've held on to it for like 6, 7 years, and I've been shocked. Like I went through, like you, I watch Numberphile and Veritasium and all those kinds of things. I watch them too for my own inspiration as well.
Yes.
And it's kind of amazing to me that across all the hundreds of videos, I'm like, I'm pretty sure this one idea isn't there anywhere yet. So I'm holding on to that one quietly.
Yes.
So
Keep
hopefully I
it.
will get the chance.
Keep
But
it.
yeah, as
Yeah.
you said, communication is its own contribution and skill, right?
Yes, I absolutely believe that. Okay, now another question that I have for you is that I try and work with my students on having a growth mindset,
Mm.
right? And so for somebody like you, once you get a million subscribers or you've hit this like monumental mark on the globe in mathematics, do you still wake up in the mornings hungry to be a better educator, to be a better mathematician, to learn more about mathematics, to be able to share math in a unique um Eddie Wu kind of way? Is that does that do you still have a drive and a fire? And where I guess where does that inspiration and that wellspring of inspiration come from?
I mean, the first thing to say is, directly to answer your question, without a doubt. I mean, that passion, that fire is still there. If anything, it's stronger than
Oh,
ever.
good.
In answer to your question of like, where does that come from? So I think it comes from a few different places. The first most obvious place is it comes from the students, the young people who I work with, right? And it comes from in both directions from students. Like number one, as you well know, because you've experienced it yourself too, when you see that moment of epiphany that students arrive at and you've shown them something and that you'll hear it, you'll see it on their faces,
Yep.
they'll sit up there and be like, what, are you serious? And it's slightly addictive actually when you get
Yes.
that moment.
Yeah.
But it also works the other way, right? Like it's when you might prepare a lesson, you think this one's pretty good, and it's flat. It doesn't connect, and you look at the students confused, and you're like, what have I done? And you walk back from your classroom to the staff room, just thinking, what? How did that become such a train wreck of a lesson? And you're like, I've got to do better than that, right? Like that's a drive there. I guess probably you were pointing out this fact that I feel like I have had, this measure of success throughout my career, however you describe it.
Right.
And for me, in some ways, if anything that's pushed me further, here's the metaphor, the image I have in my mind. Developing as an educator, developing as a mathematician, as a teacher, I guess in many different fields, it can feel like you're, climbing a mountain and you see the summit there, right? And you're sort of reaching toward it. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was in my first couple of years of teaching, I remember being surrounded by a faculty of mathematics teachers who were pretty much all old enough to be my parents. And they
Right.
did kind of treat me a little bit like, oh, look, here's little Eddie. He has no
Yeah.
idea what he's doing. We better look out for him, right? So they mentored me. They really helped me. One of the
Yes.
things that fascinated me was I would, encounter a question that I wanted to teach my students, right? And I'd try and work out a solution. And either I just couldn't work it out. I'd be like, I don't know what to do with this, right? Or I'd get an answer, I'd get a solution, I'd get a proof, but I'd be very dissatisfied with it. I'm like, this is confusing. I can tell it's confusing. I am predicting that moment. I get up in front of the class and it's just not going to be clear to them, right? So I'd turn to one of my colleagues and I'd say, hey, Bob, can you help me with this question? And Bob would, without hesitation, he wouldn't even like take a moment to look and reflect. He'd say, oh, I remember when this was in the 1995, high school certificate, and this question was a real curly one. I'm like, how can you possibly have a memory to know exactly? And then he would trot out, not only a great solution, but he's like, here's 4 other ways you can solve that. And I'm like, my goodness, like what a brain, what a mind you have, right?
Yeah.
And in my early years, I thought of like the summit I was trying to reach was one day, Dave, I hope I'll be a teacher who can have such an expansive encyclopedic knowledge of
Right.
mathematics that I can just instantly answer a question and do it well, right? So that's kind of I started to climb that mountain, right? And sort of after 4 or 5 years, when you've taught the same syllabus a few times, and you're like, I'm starting to get familiar with this. I felt like I was getting close to that summit, right? But then I realized as I reached the top of this peak that actually sometimes in class, a student would ask me a question. I'd be like, ooh, I do know the answer. And I would give it to them right away. And I'd feel very pleased with myself.
Right.
But this realization sort of dawned on me that actually, even though I was pleased to be able to give them the right answer and do it quickly, I wasn't always helping my students learn by giving
Yeah.
them the answer because I was actually stopping them from thinking and learning themselves because I
Yeah.
just, it's like someone shows you the completed jigsaw puzzle. You're like, well, now I don't need to solve it anymore, right?
Right.
And so I started to realize, oh, a great teacher doesn't just know how to answer well, they know how to question well and bring a student along and help the student themselves realize where they've gone wrong in their working or give them a clue which doesn't spoil the answer but gives them the ability to progress. And so going back to that metaphor of climbing the mountain, it's like I'd reached the top of the peak, but from that peak I could actually see other more distant mountains that I didn't realize existed before. And I'm like, I got more climbing to do, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
why, yeah, I still have this fire and this passion to keep on
That's
improving.
That's fantastic. And I love that you're talking about just asking questions being the next peak that you wanted to climb. Because that's what I really have been in the last 3 years, really, with my students. I've been very transparent. I want you to ask questions, and I give them an opportunity every week in like a Google form to ask questions. I try to make time in the class to really engage the opportunities to ask questions and work on how they can ask questions that would help them, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating than a kid raising their hand mid-class saying, Mr. Stevens, I have a question. I'm like, great. And this is where I get excited. I'm like, yes, we have a question. We're engaged. Let's go. And they say, I don't get it. And it really just burns me, right? Because in my mind, in my mathematical mind, a question, right, is a structure. They're like your voice goes up at the end, and right, like, you know what I mean, like all that. You
Tell
just
me the thing I can help you with here, right?
right, you just
Yes.
gave me a statement of ignorance. Oh no! And so, like at the beginning of the year, I do this thing where I talk about the difference between a question and a statement of ignorance, and how ignorance itself is not a negative word and all this other stuff and like I really try to focus in on how do these questions lead to better understanding, right? And when I listen to questions, I'm kind of getting categories of questions, like where's my student when they
Mm,
ask this question? Are they in a position to where they're ready to hear a good answer? Are they in a
mm,
position to where I should question them a little bit further to get them to that point?
mm, mm,
Where on their climb are they whenever they ask these questions? And I think the hardest part I have is getting kids excited to even ask those questions. So do
mm,
you have any trouble or advice for me or other teachers about how to get kids to ask questions? Or
mm,
is it just a blanketed, I have a safe environment in my room where,
mm,
people don't worry about judgment from other kids. They just
mm.
know that they're able to ask questions.
No, those are really strong provocations because they're hard. Like I've seen that establishment of a culture within a classroom where that psychological safety you're describing is there. That's it's not easy. That is not
No.
like I remember as an early career teacher seeing it, recognizing it, and thinking, but how would I create that? Like I know I don't have it, but how do I get from A to B and produce that environment?
And be
I
your
do think
authentic
like
self, by the way, and to do it
yeah,
authentically to yourself. Yeah.
100%. And I know that, there are generations of students out there who have learned very rapidly, unfortunately, that they're like, yeah, no, this particular classroom, this particular teacher is not the place to ask questions because you'll just feel like an idiot. You won't get I remember one time I did have a teacher once who, if you ever were brave enough to stick up your hand and say, I don't get it, what they would do is they would repeat exactly the same explanation they just gave, but slower, as if you were a foreign tourist. I'm like, I'm not bad at English. Like that's not the problem. I'm not comprehending. There's a conceptual link that exists
Right.
in your brain. It's not in mine. Is there another way that you can help me with this? So there's a few
Yeah.
things I would say practically, right? The first one is, I guess, in that instant when the student gives the question or the statement of ignorance, as you point out, right?
Hmm.
Like, I think, and maybe this comes from the fact that when I was at school, I studied 4 years of drama, like theater and stuff like
Oh,
that.
cool.
And I did not realize back then that that's probably the set of skills and knowledge that I would use more than any other every single moment as I'm communicating with people, right?
Yeah.
And I remember as a drama student, one of the things we would do is, for example, we would get given a play. We would like when I say play, like a plot line, a storyline, right? It's like, okay, you and Dave and your friend, you have to be three people going on an expedition through the jungle, and you have to discover some treasure, and then you have to have a fight over whose treasure it is, and then you have to, something like that, right? So it's like you get given a storyline, but then the twist is, Dave, our drama teacher would say, okay, now here's the challenge. The only dialogue that you can use is this nonsense word, right? And they would tell us some word like, I don't know,
Peanut butter.
Jabberwocky, something that
Right.
doesn't mean anything, right?
Right.
And they're like, all you can say is this word
Yeah.
over and over again, right? And you have to somehow convey the meaning of your entire plot line through your body, through your posture, through your tone of voice, through all of that. You just can't use quote unquote words, right? And we learn pretty quickly that the body and the voice are powerful instruments for communication, even without the content of your words. And when we in this classroom are trying to create that environment of, yeah, this is a safe space, right? It isn't just in our words. It isn't just us up the front saying, you can ask anything you like. We've got to back that with, not just acceptance of a question, but like excitement and like the almost, it's a weird way to say it, but like the dumber the question is, the happier I am that a student is willing to ask it. Because like, yes, we're here to say we don't understand. How can we move toward understanding, right?
Right.
So little things like that, I think, are very powerful, and they make in sequence and over time, that is what creates the culture of, yeah, we're cool with this. He's a, Mr. Wu, Mr. Stevens is a teacher you can say anything to and not be afraid, if that makes sense. That's really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm really excited. So my school, our semester starts in 2 weeks, and this conversation is just really filling my bucket, man. You're really giving me, just having this conversation with you is really just giving me that just giving the just re-energizing for this next school year, and I really appreciate that. I Do you have time for like one more question? All right. No,
Absolutely, for sure.
okay, great. Thank you so much. You're being so generous, and I very much appreciate it. Um, I want my students to hear from you, maybe kind of a historical perspective. You talked about seeing all those mathematicians as you study mathematics, and we're going through it now as you're teaching it. Is there one particular mathematician that you feel connected to, or that you just
Mm,
like, this guy was so smart. I can't believe he thought to do this, or
mm.
this mathematician was just like the breadth of work that so and so did was really inspiring. Is there one mathematician that sticks out for you?
Yeah, that's a hard question to
Yeah,
answer when
it
you're
is.
picking just one. I'm going to slightly cheat a little bit,
Please.
Dave, and I hope you don't mind. But I feel justified in my cheating selection. I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to pick someone whom people wouldn't normally describe as a mathematician.
Okay.
Then again, I would not normally describe myself as a mathematician, so I feel like I've got permission to do
Fair.
that.
Fair enough.
And it's super easy to argue that this person did a huge amount of mathematics in order to do what we do know them for. And so the person I'm thinking of is Richard Feynman. So people would classically introduce him as a physicist, right? They wouldn't call him a mathematician. I think even he himself would not have described himself as a mathematician. However, the reason he comes to mind is number one, I'll never forget, I was talking to a physics teacher who used to work here at my school. And I remember saying to him, "Hey man, can you tell me a bit about, help me explain the relationship between mathematics and physics in your teaching, right? Because
Yeah.
I know there is mathematics and physics." And he said to me, "Well, Eddie, it depends on where you're at in terms of your learning journey. I know, say for in school, right, you're doing a bunch of like experimentation, and that's not really maths, even though you use mathematical tools to understand your results. You do a bit of, you work with the equations, that kind of thing. But then when you hit university, he said to me, I opened up my first physics textbook and it was just 100% maths. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So that there's a deep connection there, right? So I feel justified to say Richard Feynman, definitely someone who was steeped in the world of mathematics. But the thing I particularly love about him, and the thing that resonates about him with me, is the thing you said before, right? He was not just a phenomenal mind, incredible at solving, problems that no one had ever encountered before. Like famously, towards the end of his career, one of the things he did was he solved the mystery of how and why the Challenger space shuttle tragically exploded. Right, he solved that
Oh,
mystery.
yeah.
But not only was he an incredible intellect, but I think the thing he was most unique about was his ability to take a complex idea like, quantum electrodynamics
Mhm.
and to articulate that in a way that was clear and understandable to other people. He created these things called Feynman diagrams, which were this incredibly simple visualization for what happens when two photons are interacting with each other. And when you see a Feynman diagram for the first time, you're like, oh, how else would someone explain or visualize or sort of clarify to someone else what's going on there? But there was a time when those things didn't exist. He just made them up out of his brain, and that's an incredible skill of creativity and of communication that I aspire to. And one
Yeah.
of my favorite quotes that I just say over and over again to every teacher, and in fact, many students who I work with, I say, it's from Richard Feynman: "You do not understand something truly until you can explain it simply." That is just amazing to me. I come back to this profound idea over and over again. So I think that's why, Dave, I'd have to pick Richard
Ah,
Feynman.
that's a fantastic, fantastic, um, and really eloquent way of describing your favorite. That's amazing.
Yeah,
So
no, thank you.
it's almost as if you practiced, you know?
Well, like I said, I feel like I had to give a good explanation because I'm slightly cheating. I'm like, is he
Right.
really a mathematician? I'm like, here's my reasons why. So
Yeah,
there you go.
exactly. Exactly. Oh man. I really appreciate you giving me so much of your time. I don't want to steal any more of your time. I know you're really busy. I know you have uh much bigger things to do. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you so much for connecting with me and my students. And just I would honestly, after talking with you, if you ever found yourself in Kansas City and you didn't call me and tell me, I would probably have my feelings hurt. No, I would. I would have my feelings hurt. Um, so if you
Well,
ever find
Dave,
yourself in Kansas
can I
City,
say,
yeah,
in 2020, mid 2020, I was scheduled to come to the US for the first time. So I've never been to the US before.
Yeah.
And part of why I was meant to be coming along was that the first book that I wrote, which published here in Australia in 2018, it was published in the US. And I was really excited and thrilled. And we had the whole tour booked. And in fact, Kansas City was one of the stops on the tour.
Really?
But of course, people remember 2020, not a great
Pandemic.
year for
Yeah.
international travel. So the trip never happened. But I retain hope that one day we'll be able to make it happen. So
Yeah.
I will definitely take you up on that offer. And
Please.
can I also say one last thing as we finish,
Yeah.
which I hope your students take on board, but it's in direct response to something you just said, right? You were commenting, and I take it as a, words of kindness and as a compliment. But you're talking about getting busy doing quote unquote bigger things, right? And I have the privilege of working with a university, with academics and researchers. I work now, even though I'm still here at school, I also work with the Department of Education here in New South Wales, which is a state of Australia, and I deliver professional learning across the state to teachers and schools and that kind of thing. And those things are quote unquote bigger, they're broader, but I want to say there is nothing bigger than being able to have an impact to positively influence even just a single student and have the opportunity to change the trajectory of their life with something as powerful as mathematics. There isn't anything bigger than that. So I think the time that we've been able to spend together has been tremendously valuable, not just to you and your students, I hope, but to me as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for giving me the privilege and the
Yeah.
opportunity.
No, you got me. You got me because that's exactly what this is. That's exactly like the moment. And I call them light bulb moments, right? You were talking about this earlier, and you were talking about when you see a kid or see a student that just it clicks. I give them different wattages. Sometimes it's a 40-watt light bulb moment. Sometimes it's a 120-watt light
Yeah,
bulb,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
sometimes it's really great. I started doing that when I was tutoring, and I started seeing that. And you're right, that connection with people has been the most powerful connection through mathematics. And just you're right, you're absolutely right, and it makes me emotional
Mm,
because it is that powerful. It really truly
mm.
is. And so thank you again, really genuinely really appreciate it.
No, my absolute pleasure. Dave, take care.
I
I hope this
will.
goes well for your students. And yeah, I'll be in touch.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye,
Take
Eddie.
care. See ya.